this is gonna probably be annoying to learn, but I think it'll sound really cool. And
you weren't wrong.
I'm a huge fan of Warren and Flick. I just really love their music, and it was such a fun idea that they had to do this listening party. We're going to go through their third album, their latest album, Cormorant, and take a listen to every track on the album. We got a couple videos. We got some exclusive stuff on our YouTube channel that we put out earlier this week. Dig around if you haven't watched this great elegy video. And we're going to get the backstory behind this group, what they did at the International Society of Bassists Convention, at their recital, and much more. Really hope you enjoy this, and links to everything are in the description below.
It really was just pretty much exactly 10 years ago. I think like 10 years in a month now.
yeah.
But Grant and I were lucky enough to be a part of something that sadly no longer exists called the Acoustic Music Seminar, which was a program that was designed and run by Mike Marshall, who's a great mandolin player. You can hear him on Edgar's Uncommon Ritual record. He's the guy who plays mandolin for Zigeunerweisen and a bunch of other tracks on there. But Mike's a really cool guy and has had a very interesting career. And his goal with this program was to bring together young string musicians who kind of wanted to collaborate on original music that didn't really fit into genre boundaries super well. So he would curate 16 musicians to come together each year, and we would basically just be rotating through different combinations of those musicians and working on people's original music. Very high pressure situation, super fun. We got to workshop it like a tune for 2 hours, and then we'd go in and we'd get to play it for some of our musical heroes. And just like some of the people in the couple years that we got to be there, we got to play tunes for Vesson, which is one of my favorite Swedish bands. We got to play for Bela Fleck. We got to play for Joseph Conyers. He gave a masterclass. We got to play for the Emerson String Quartet. We got to play for Clarice Assad. And that's just scratching like the surface.
That's just the guest artists too, yeah. Like the clinicians, I think in the years that we were there included like Brian Sutton, who's a great flat picking guitar player, and Casey Dreesen on violin, Daryl Scott, great singer-songwriter, and then Julian Lodge too. So it was a really cool experience, and like I don't think we maybe would have met without it, but it would have taken a lot longer, especially since I was at the time mostly playing American improvised music in bluegrass and like early jazz. And I think at that point too, you were just sort of starting to like go in towards the like new acoustic thing.
Yeah, I had mostly been playing classical up until that point. So really, really a special experience for us. And really the spirit of that sort of working on original music together is what Warren and Flick is. It's an extension of that program, and just wanting to see what happens when you get personalities that have a bunch of different skills together on their instruments, and what music can we create through that.
Yeah, it's kind of a long-term AMS.
Yeah.
Cool. Wow. It's such a pity that doesn't exist anymore, but what a ridiculous, amazing roster of people to get to work with. Where were you both living at the time? Because I believe you both are now in Ann Arbor, right? Which makes being a duo easier. But where, what was the state of affairs 10 years ago?
I was still in high school, so I lived in Bowling Green, Ohio, which is just south of Toledo, and then you were in Ann Arbor at that.
Yeah, I was just a little bit into my undergrad living in Ann Arbor, but that was kind of the irony, is that we literally were an hour apart, and we had to go to Savannah, Georgia to actually figure out like, wow, there's someone I jive really well with that lives like right down the road, and so we started collaborating in a number of different ways pretty shortly after that. The duo project got formalized as like a musical project. I would say like 8 years ago, probably.
Yeah, like 2017ish, something around there.
So.
Yeah.
Cool. I love that all your albums have bird titles, and your recent one, Cormorant. You're speaking my language, because I see those little guys literally every day drying their wings on the waterfront. Why birds? I love birds, but I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, before I was like really considering music as like a career path, I was like pretty set on being an ornithologist. Like I had my North American Encyclopedia of Birds, and I was just glued to it. But Jacob's high school art teacher is an incredible portrait artist, and does really amazing realistic portraits of these birds. Like, so each record that we've done has been done by Ricardo Capraro, and we just sort of were like, I think this is a theme that sort of fits with the rep, and like this latest one we were like, this feels aquatic, so we're gonna go with an aquatic bird.
Yeah, it's been fun just to kind of like once we're done with the record and listen through, be like, what bird does this most closely match?
Yeah.
And then also all the other considerations that you like. Does it look good on the cover? Is the name something that would make sense to be a record name? But it has been sort of nice to have that continuity of like, you can tell it's a Warren and Flick record, not only because our name is on it, but because it's a bird.
Yeah.
You know.
I love it, and you got no shortage. It's like Mac OS releases. Like what? What California location will we have now? Very cool. So let's dig into the album. If that's
Great.
I've listened to everything, and you both have such a fun the everything from the instrumentation of various tracks to I think I might be hearing some different tunings from Jacob as we listen through. Just very, I love, and we got a lot of bass nerds that listen to this. Those are my kind of nerds. So, but yeah, let's just go through and can we start with? And I love the title of the first track. And I noticed on YouTube you've got the umlaut. So how are we pronouncing this first track?
Yes, so the first track is one that I wrote, and it's an ode to that favorite Swedish band I mentioned before, Vesson. And my goal with this tune was, well, maybe we should just get a little context on this record. Grant and I have been brewing the record for quite some time, and we actually did record a first pass at it in January of 2024. Yeah. And we listened to that record, and we said, we can do it better. And so we can do it better, and we also want to write some new reps. So this was one of the tunes that I actually wrote after having listened to that first pass at the record. And I wanted to write something that was sort of a Swedish-style fiddle tune written for bass, because I spent a lot of my life learning fiddle tunes that were written for fifth-tuned instruments, which provides a lot of wonderful and annoying challenges, as I'm sure many of the listeners are aware. But I wanted to write something that was like bass-centric to have on the record. So it's an ode to Vesson, and it's also an ode to bass fiddle tunes. That's why it's called Bassin. In the process, I think I actually did write something that is incredibly challenging on bass because it's basically a string crossing etude. But I like it. I like how it turned out. So, yeah.
And Grant, what are you playing on that? What instrument are you playing on that? Because I was watching the video. What are we hearing there?
Yeah, so that's a nyckelharpa, and it's which is basically a Swedish keyed fiddle, and they're typically tuned sort of near viola range, but the one on this record is actually the long name for the instrument is the four-road chromatic soprano nyckelharpa, which basically means that it's a violin version of the nyckelharpa. So it has all the keys on the side which move these small posts to stop the string like your left hand would directly with your fingers, and then there's sympathetic strings, so that's how it gets the ring, and it's a bowed instrument, but it's tuned like a violin, G, D, A, E from low to high, and fully chromatic then too, so you can play all your half steps. Yeah.
Wow. How many instruments do you play, just out of curiosity?
That's a good question. Basically anything tuned in fifths. That's sort of the thing. They're pretty much all there, and then I dabble in lever harp a little bit. So, yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Love it. Well, let's keep going through the album if that's okay. Next up is Bonk. And I love the titles of all of these. I guess the one after this, maybe a title we all know, but tell us about Bonk. What are we hearing here?
Yeah, so maybe we'll start with the title just because it's funny. But the reason it's called Bonk, I think it had a different name at first. It
was like Road to London or something like that.
Yeah, we sometimes name our tunes after like Crokinole tournaments, which is a Canadian board game that we both like to play. Anyways, it was going to be called something else, but I was writing this tune that was meant to be like a tune that was sort of in the style of Legos. So it had like a bunch of endings that could sort of slot into different parts. And one of my housemates is a singer, and he just kind of got the main theme stuck in his head, and he kept using the word bonk to describe like the kind of low notes that happen at the beginning of this track. on this track, Grant is playing the nickel harpa again, but we have an interesting bass that is actually being used as well. So we're using I'm calling it a tenor bass. It's basically a high C bass that has solo strings on the bottom 3 strings. So the tuning for this particular track, for Bonk, I've got a high C, and then I've got the A string, which would be the second string on that bass, or the first string on a solo tune bass, is actually going to be tuned down to a G on that track. So it's C, G. The E string is tuned up to an F. So I've got only a second between the middle 2 strings. So it's C, G, F, and then the low B is tuned up to a C, which is the same C as a cello. So I can't go any lower than a cello on that instrument unless I tune down that low string a little bit more. So yeah, again, the tuning high to low, C, G, F, C, which has been a really fun challenge. We've got a few tunes on there that use that C bass in different tunings. And it's a fun way of kind of pushing more of that variety of timbre, variety of resonance that I think is really critical, especially when you're putting together a duo record that can get kind of stale if you don't think about those things, you know?
It's cool. It's a okay. I was curious. That is a fascinating tuning. Wow, very cool.
Yeah, to be honest, like when I started working with that bass, it was inspired in large part by the nickel harpa, because the nickel harpa, as Grant was saying, has these sympathetic strings that basically when you play any note, there's one chromatic string that's going to ring and provide that extra resonance. And with bass, I was like, okay, I've got 4. So there is some sympathetic resonance going on in like standard tuning. There's a little bit more in the tuning that I use, which a lot of people call Edgar tuning, right? The low E with the top 3 solo strings. But can I like take a bass and really just push it over the edge? And so I started by just basically tuning that bass to a big open C chord. I was like, it's going to sound really good in this one key and probably not so good in other keys. But actually, as it turns out, it sounds pretty unique and resonant for a lot of notes just because of how the tensions play out and how some of these overtones overlap. So it's really, really been fun to play around with.
Well, so the third track, I saw the title. I didn't think anything of it because we see the word elegy before. Then I hear a very familiar opening from Grant.
I think there have been a couple arrangements done with like classical guitar before of the elegy, but honestly, I didn't know about that until I started researching after we had done this arrangement. I had always just thought this tune would sound very nice in the style of like an early like 20th century parlor song. Like, you know, you go down to the sheet music store, you bring back this song, and you kind of sit down and play it with someone at the piano or someone at the guitar. And so I wanted to kind of reinvent it in a, I mean, it's not modern per se, but like a new interpretation of it. And so Grant and I kind of worked out, we started with the piano part and was like, okay, what harmonies, like, or the piano reduction, what harmonies was Bottesini kind of writing? And then we sort of like, okay, he's got this special guitar, like what voicings are going to speak well on this? We're going to be faithful to some degree, but we also want to make sure that it actually sounds good on the instrument we're translating it to. So I think that's how it came along. And yeah, Grant did a lot of wonderful work, just like listening to the piano parts, listening to the string parts, and deciding what made sense to translate and what made sense to kind of reinvent. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was a really fun process. And I think too, like Jacob mentioned the guitar, it's a 5-string octave tenor guitar, which is basically a cello, but it's a guitar, but it has an extra high string on it. So you could think about it like a 5-string violin, but an octave down, but it's a guitar. So it's C, G, D, A, E from low to high.
Continuing his theme of tuned in fifths.
Yes.
Yeah.
The only logical tuning. And it was fun to work it out because like as Jacob was saying, like it does feel like a vocal song or like a parlor song. And like growing up playing a lot of like early swing music or something like that, like it's very reminiscent, especially in the harmony and like how the melody flows like of a vocal tune or something like that. So it was fun to sort of reinvent that and like use that sort of language that you might hear more in like a folk music or you know, a little bit more modern like in jazz or something like that, and play with those textures on the guitar to sort of mimic, you know, like a running piano or you know, using cross picking and strumming rather than like big block chords or something like that. And the advantage too with the guitar is like I can sort of mimic the bass motion too, because, you know, he's playing up in, you know, violin range basically most of the time. And it's cool to like have that instrument in the duo, especially with bass, because I think it allows, you know, the bass then to carry a lot more of the melody, and for the listener it doesn't necessarily feel like the bass has dropped out or something like that. Like it's pretty supportive and they mesh really well, which is cool.
Yeah, having that extra little bit of range on the low end definitely makes up for a lot, I think.
Yeah.
So
I don't even know if I want to attempt to pronounce this is it slang Polska.
yeah. Yeah, so this track is one of the few that is...
It's a cover.
It's a cover.
Yeah.
A cover of a traditional tune. We don't know who wrote it. But it's the Slang Polska von Osterrade. And continuing with our love of Swedish music, that is where this tune comes from. It comes from the Swedish tradition. And as far as we are aware, it's a town tune. So the town of Osterrade is where it is from, and the slang polska is the type of dance. And so a slang polska is it's basically like a waltz mixed with a march. We don't really have something in American fiddle tunes that's exactly equivalent, but it's in 3/4 and it has that equal emphasis on each beat. If you play it traditionally, we're kind of arranging it in a way that changes it around, the feel around sometimes. But yeah, it's been a really fun one for us to get to work on. And thinking about like the variety of putting together a record, I think one of the things I love about how Cormorant turned out is we really put an emphasis on like textural and like groove variety. So like looking at where we just came from, like we started off with something that's more of like a minor kind of driving Swedish tune, transitioning into sort of like a pseudo classical humorous thing, I would say Bonk is, going on into something full classical, which is, you know, I mean, our own interpretation of full classical, but that has that timbral and like timing variety. And then back to something that is like, yes, this is a dance tune. This is in a dance style and is very specific. So it was fun to kind of channel like that double fiddle sound for this arrangement.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think maybe like bass nerds like me, we sort of forget the listener fatigue that can happen if the style isn't very too much or the instrumentation isn't very too much. I remember an interview from Edgar Meyer like decades ago talking about how like the maximum amount of time he thinks someone would want to listen to solo bass or bass and piano. And I was even chatting with a jazz bassist down in LA, Katie Thoreau. She just put out a bass and voice solo album, which she hadn't done before, but she was talking about how she was trying to make it just as completely varied from track to track as possible in terms of how she laid it down with some effects on one track, doing like a Beatles tune, then doing something very different. And so I really like you're creating a diverse and wide listening experience through these tracks. So bravo on doing that. That takes a lot of thought.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I think too, like just to add on to that a little bit, like the Cormorant record in particular, I think is really unique for us because I think it's a really good reflection of like what a Warren and Flick show looks like these days too. Because you know, you see two people come on stage and they have way too many instruments for two people, and one van, and like it's cool to hear that I think on the record, and I think it's very transparent too of like what you hear on the record, you could go see that like in person in a live show too, which is really nice. And like I don't know, it was a really enjoyable process, like thinking about that, like presenting that both in a live space, but then also like reflecting that through the recorded medium too, which was really fun.
Yeah, because I think one avenue you can take is like if you are trying to go for variety, you can do a lot of studio magic to like make variety happen. And our like sort of what Warren and Flick is like whatever we do, we want to be able to do it acoustically as well. So that's really let us to like write music and arrange music that like utilizes a bunch of different instruments, a bunch of different techniques to provide that variety so that we can and do pull it off in a live show as well. Not that there's anything wrong with like studio magic. We love doing that as well. It's just the Warren and Flick project. Like that's kind of what we've decided is our main kind of wheelhouse for now, at least, you know? Yeah.
Cool. Well, as a acoustic performer myself, I appreciate knowing that you're going to hear at the show what you're hearing on the record, because studio magic is also a lot of fun, and it's amazing what you can do to make everything amazing in the studio. But that's really cool that what you're hearing on the record. That's what the show is going to be like. What now? Talk about Side Out. What are we hearing here?
One thing that's occurred when we're on tours is we'll find as many pickleball courts as we can. So that's what this tune is about, Side Out being a pickleball term. I think this was also sort of a rewrite from the first go of the record too. Like we were just looking for, especially in the guitar rep, something more up, something that felt like running, and it's definitely one that can get us exhausted by the end of it. But this tune, I was like, pickleball is like the most bluegrass sport there is, whatever that means. But I really wanted to sort of dig into that sort of sound, and I love how, especially like Jacob's accompaniment in a setting like this, where it is maybe drawing more from like a bluegrass tradition or sort of these really driving fiddle tunes. There's a lot that the bass is capable of, both in terms of playing lead and providing different textures, and I think that's what this tune really showcases. And it's pretty virtuosic on the bass. I was writing it initially thinking like, this is gonna probably be annoying to learn, but I think it'll sound really cool. You
weren't wrong. You weren't wrong.
So that's, I think, sort of how the tune came to be. I think I was just writing it on a different tour. I think I was actually working with a bluegrass group at the time I was writing this tune, had an off day, and I was like, yeah, let's do it. And I sent it to Jacob, and it was a bit of a bear to put together, but really, really happy with how it turned out. Yeah.
Jacob, remind me, what are you doing in terms of accompaniment on this track?
Yeah, so I guess I'm drawing on a bit of like the different elements that you would hear in a bluegrass band, but translating them through techniques on the bass. Yeah. So you can hear up front that Grant kind of has the running line, and I'm sort of providing pads in a way, like these long tones. That's a term that acoustic musicians will sometimes use for just like background textures, and that's kind of like the violin role that you might find in a bluegrass band. And then transitioning as Grant starts to play melody into like, okay, so I could play just a bass line, or I could try to combine some bass notes with sort of a more guitar strummy part using my bow. And so you'll hear me kind of using those textures that you might hear from a guitar strum, but voicing chords on the bass, chords that incorporate low notes, but sometimes chords that also will incorporate a low held note and like a harmonic, so that I can fill out more of the register that would be there if there was a full band playing. And then you'll hear as we kind of pass back and forth these roles that Grant will sometimes pick up that guitar role or pick up that bass player role, and we'll pass those around a bit.
That's cool. And folks, I will make sure to link up to this, but Jacob's done some wonderful instructional videos on some of the techniques like chopping and such. And the clarity with which you present those is really cool. And it's like, I'm continually amazed at the sonic palette you really can draw out of the double bass, our four-string friend, even in standard fourths tuning. But it's really, it's really cool what you're doing on this album. Both.
Yeah, and I think using those techniques and realizing that you can emulate all those other instruments, it just makes the sort of textures that you're able to provide solo or as an accompanist, like it makes them more three-dimensional. Because essentially you're able to just like push the timbral variety in all these different directions and start to like stack things together, which I find really, really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Next up, we've got steak! Exclamation point.
So this is originally, this is also a cover. This is originally an American old time fiddle tune called "Streak O Fat, Streak O Lean," which I think we both probably heard on like the Brittany Haas record. Is that where you?
Yeah,
first
Brittany
heard it?
Haas, great fiddle player.
Who now plays in like Punch Brothers, for example. This was one that we were sort of experimenting with both the C bass, the tenor bass, in various tunings, and then I'm playing actually a 5-string fiddle on this one, but also in a cross tuning. So I think, what am I in on that one? C G D from low to high. So the top 3 strings are tuned down a whole step to get even more C. Happening.
And then we paired that, the C bass from low to high on that one is C, F, A, C. So kind of matching some of those open Cs and then providing, different, like he's got the Ds and the Gs, I've got the Fs and the As. So we have this like nice kind of coverage of the tonal space that we're in. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And this one is also sort of put together in a slightly more traditional fashion, but I guess with an awareness of minimalism is maybe how I would describe this. Like you can hear on the intro, this kind of nice patterny thing happening, like with the bass and like the long tone harmonic thing happening in the fiddle. But a lot of this one is really in like a double fiddle sort of style, like drawing more from that traditional sound, but using sort of the beef of the tenor bass and the low stuff there, I think, to really kind of enhance the sound, which is cool.
Yeah, I like listening to this one too, because one of the things that Grant and I will do often on long drives is we will put on like Steve Reich or like just like listen through like long minimalist things. Yeah. Not that this is very loosely based on minimalism, but I kind of love how, just like how overlaid the patterns can get in like American old time. Yeah. And so to like really dig into an old time tune and try to like arrange it in such a way that it just kind of like leans ever so slightly more into those minimalist textures that are already present in the genre was really, really fun.
Awesome. It's a great listen. That's very cool. And then next we got Water and Soap. Is that an original?
It is an original. And this is actually sort of inspired by a tune from the Chris Thiele, Edgar Meyer, bass and fifth-tuned instrument duo, as is the tradition. Actually, this is a funny story too. I think we didn't know it at the time, but we both went to a Chris and Edgar show in Ann Arbor.
That's true.
Before we were at AMS,
before we knew each other. Yeah.
I think at Michigan Theater is where it was in Ann Arbor. But he was talking about there's the first tune on their first record is called Ham and Cheese, and I always liked this tune because it's I think it's a 2-part fiddle tune, basically fiddle tune, loose term, but like the A part's in G and then like the B part's in A, but it's like a very seamless transition between the two tonalities, and I thought that was a very interesting concept. And I was teaching a mandolin camp in Oregon a couple years ago, and my job was to teach a course on composition, so I was like, I should probably write something for the class, and I was thinking about that, on mandolin. And that tune, that it got its title from a Clarence White quote, who is this great bluegrass and lead guitar player, and he was, I think, quoted as saying he he had to choose between a shower or dinner before playing a show while he was on tour, and he's quoted as saying, "I chose the ham and cheese." And I was in a similar conundrum at one point in the camp, going, just a million miles an hour trying to do classes and concerts, whatever. And I chose differently, so I called it water and soap. And that's how that tune got its name, and sort of inspired too by like the tonality. Like you'll hear like the A part is sort of like G, E minor centric, and then we go to like a brightness of like E, C sharp minor sort of stuff. And I think it's a really fun tune for the duo, and I think really again showcases like the nice pairing between the tenor guitar and like everything that the bass can do, both showing how they're really strong lead voices, but also can do so much too in creating texture and variance in the accompanying role. I really like this arrangement because it feels, I think, somewhere between maybe like a classical composition and a fiddle tune. I don't know if you've got more to add on it, but
yeah, no, I think
it's a fun listen, and it was really fun to put together in the writing process, really collaborative, especially on this one. That's something that I guess we haven't really talked about too much yet, but like when we bring in a tune in this project, in like Westbound situation, like a quartet project too, usually it's going to be like just the melody and maybe some chords and maybe some ideas about the form, and teach that by ear first, and then pretty much all of the arranging is done collaboratively, in putting together a narrative, finding different textures, what works and what doesn't on different instruments. And I think this is a really good representation of that process, especially in this tune, because it turned out in, I think, a really balanced way, and I think pretty different from what I expected when I initially brought it in, especially in hearing like this really amazing narrative of the voices passing, and you can hear that like especially too like how they overlap like in the little rounds and stuff within it. So it's a fun one to put together.
Yeah, and it's got a great backstory to that one too. For Zola, I took some notes on these tracks as I was listening, and I wrote Jacob's tuning ? So maybe we could get into that. But tell us about the track, and maybe you can answer my question on the tuning.
Yeah, for sure. So this one is another one that's on the C bass.
Okay.
And some people may be familiar that I've been writing occasionally these sort of harmonic, double-handed harp harmonic pieces that I've been putting out online. So this is actually one that initially started out as a solo, just like for solo double bass. And it is possible to play it on the instrument that I'm using, but you're actually able to create this tuning on standard tune bass, this interval set, I should say, on solo tune bass, on Viennese tune bass, on high C bass. Actually, the only bass tuning or somewhat standard bass tuning that you can't make this tuning on, ironically, is Edgar tuning. That's like the one tuning that I can't use for this interval set. But yeah, the tuning specifically for this track on that bass is C, E, A, C from low to high. I wrote it for my partner, Zola, and it's an exploration of this two-handed technique where you have an ostinato in one hand, which is that sort of 7/4 figure that keeps repeating throughout the piece, and then kind of increasingly complex things to do with your other hand. And just for context, the reason I wrote it was some of the other pieces I've written for double-handed harp are fairly challenging. And I wanted to write something that was a bit more accessible if someone wanted to pick up the score and just like start getting their toes wet in like using both hands to play independent parts. Using harp harmonics like Zola is a really great start for that. And so I do have the sheet music for that one available. But it was really fun to actually start playing this one on tour and then realize, wow, it like sounds great when you get to hear all the other things in the harmony that I couldn't hold over, given that I only have two hands. And so it was really nice to kind of add guitar, still kind of capture some of the sparse vibe, especially when you're talking about an acoustic string band record, I feel like it can sometimes get very notey.
Yes.
And so we were trying to keep, a good balance of like things that had sustain, things that had quick notes. And this one for me is it's really nice to have it as we're coming to the close of the record and just kind of hear that expansive, like just space and resonance. And yes, it's a little complex, but also I think it listens pretty simple.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And then we close out the album with Zephyr.
Because the nickel harpa is such a popular instrument, I thought it'd be good to write a pop tune for it. So that's what this one is. And I actually originally put this together for like a weird like lo-fi math rock album, which never came out yet. Maybe it will one day. But we were sort of just playing it around, and it worked really well between harpa and bass. And I guess we've been playing this one for a long time too. This was really reworked from first go to second go too, which was cool. Mm-hmm. Like if you were to hear those back to back, they'd be pretty different arrangements. And yeah, I think it's again like playing with like variety for the listener, and that this is like a very improvised piece. Like there's like extended solos, and like what is happening in the accompaniment too is really treated like a pop song or just something that you could jam, which is enjoyable, and I think brings a freshness and sort of balance to all the maybe meticulous arranged things, but also having something that's a bit more freeing, I think is pretty nice to have at the end of the record.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Grant and I try to do a lot while we're putting together our repertoire is make sure that we don't get stuck in some way. And that can mean like not getting stuck in a specific technique, not getting stuck in a specific genre, but it can also mean, I think more often for us, like not getting stuck in a specific way of arranging something or a way of thinking about an arrangement. So if you like kind of go back and think about all the things we were talking about for the different tracks today, like we had things that were written for like people, or were written thinking about like a specific like type of groove, like a dance groove. We had some things that were written that were thinking about like a band that we like. And sometimes it's like a like certain like concept in music that we like. Zephyr for me was really interesting because Zephyr is like a kind of gentle breeze that sort of comes in. And when we started arranging this one, we were like, okay, we're going to take that idea about what Zephyr is, and we're going to kind of try to mirror that in the arrangement. And so you can hear the way it's a very simple form in terms of arrangements where it kind of builds to a peak and then comes out. But I think it really, sometimes when you like kind of vocalize and like with whoever you're writing with or playing with, like this is the like direction we want to go. And then how are we going to mirror that in all the choices that we make? Sometimes it can really like produce this kind of cohesive arrangement that you wouldn't have had you been focusing on like, oh, like let's use this technique, So for me, I love listening to this one because not only do I think it sounds like that, but I also know that we thought about that. So I think I'm predisposed to also be listening for it a bit. I think that's really an interesting thing about that arrangement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really cool way to put something together and to really have that much all those different facets that you're different things you're thinking about, different styles, and yeah, it's an awesome album. I will link up so folks can check out the physical version, and I'll obviously link up to all things Warren and Flick, and pick it up digitally as the tracks come out. I got to ask about, as this episode is coming out, Jacob and Grant, it sounds like, are playing or will have just played probably the headlining recital for the International Society Basis convention. Jacob won the 2023 solo competition and had done very well previously also, but to take the first prize, and then it sounds like Grant is involved in this recital. So can you talk about what people will have heard on the at ISB in Florida?
Yeah, so assuming everything went to plan, you will have just heard a lot of material from the Cormorant record, and some classical stuff. I think when I was thinking about putting together this recital, I did win the solo competition, which is, playing a lot of classical repertoire, and it's something I love to do and will have done in that recital. But like the main part of my career at this point is playing my original music, a lot with Grant. So I really wanted to showcase like what I am doing on the instrument, and I really do think that like the more that Grant and I collaborate, the more that I feel like this project is really in that vein of classical music, not necessarily because of the themes that we're drawing on, but because of the like type of intention that we're putting into the project. And so like the way that we're rehearsing the music, the way that we're creating the music feels very much feels very much like one of the things that I love about the classical genre generally, which is that there's just such an attention to like detail in a lot of different ways. And that can exist in any genre. It just happens to be rather structured in classical music. So I think that's one of the things I love about this, and part of why I wanted to program a lot of my original stuff with Grant on this ISB recital, is just to really show that part of me.
Very cool. And, I've used you, Jacob, but both of you guys are a great example of doing your own thing and making a career out of it. I'm just curious, like, what does a month in the life of Grant and Jacob look like? And I know it changes. Like you've been putting together this album, and I think it's very cool. Most people, I would have just put out the album and said, I'll just do better next time. But to take something that you've done and then like redo it, I think that's pretty cool. And that says something about the level of detail that you're going. But so you got this season of life right now where you've put all this energy in, and now you're releasing the album. Then you got the quartet, and then I'm just curious, like, we can go any direction with this, but do you have a regular, do you two get together as a duo and a quartet like regularly? Is it like Tuesday at 10 we rehearse duo, or is it like total chaos and just project by project? Or I don't even know where I'm going with this question, but maybe you could take it like, what does your professional life look like these days? Yeah.
A couple things to note. It's not complete chaos, but it's closer to that than the other one.
Okay.
I would say that like the way that we function right now, and what has felt really good, especially about the last year and a half of Grant and I working together, is we sort of had a discussion where it's like, okay, what do we want to focus our energy on? And for us, it was like the duo is something that we love to do. We're gonna like, when we have time, we're gonna make time for the duo, and that has like, I can't believe the amount of things we've packed into just the last year alone. I mean, we were in the finals for the Concert Artists Guild competition, which is, as far as I can tell, is one of the first groups that like play original music or improvised music to be in the finals. That was a really fun experience. We've recorded this record. And something we actually didn't even mention about this record is this is the first record that we engineered. I mixed it and I mastered it. I've always done like the graphic design for our records, but like literally we've been in at every stage of this record. So it's provided like this sort of, even more insane variety of tasks that Grant and I are working on together. And so I would say the structure of our days is like, we each have, we have duo stuff that happens and we have individual gig stuff that happens. But you're catching us on one of the Warren and Flick days where we'll just say like, when we have time, Grant's going to come over to my place, I'm going to go over to his place, and we're going to just do whatever's on the docket, which for us might be like working on our double concerto that we're writing. It might be working on promoting this record. It might be working on mixing upcoming singles. It might be rehearsing, might be writing new music. So I'd say, that's been a big part of it.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty big variety, which I think keeps it fresh too for us. And like, I think one of the things that I enjoy most about working with Jacob too is like we're always learning together and learning from each other. And I think that's something that we definitely took from AMS, the Acoustic Music Seminar, like that process of doing things collaboratively in like a very healthy way too. Like it's really made this a joy of a project, and I think something that like we both see happening like for the rest of our lives, which is awesome. And I think it's really fun too, because it's also, we never quite know what's going to happen either. And I really love that about both the music and just like working together. I think it's a really fun friendship, and like, it's work, but it also is, something that we both really enjoy doing. So it's not also uncommon that, like, okay, like, oh yeah, I'll come over at noon and then I'm here till 8 or 10 or whatever, if I've got nothing else going on. And it's really cool just to see how much we've grown too. Thinking about, like, wow, we met like 10 years ago, but it feels like such a blur because we've done so much fun stuff and we've learned so much together too.
There's a really good lesson in that, like making time for figuring out what's important to you. That's a skill that comes with time. And then just simply, like, the life of an artist, the life of a musician can be, chaos or loosely organized chaos is what it ends up being a lot of the time when things are in your control and aren't. But when there is that open space, just filling it with things that are important to you, it's amazing what you can do when you just make that decision. And
truly.
You guys are a great example of that. Well, I thanks for taking the time. Anything else you want to get out to the audience about? All the links will be, if you're listening to the podcast, just click on whatever phone or whatever you're holding, and you can find. I'll link up to the Warren Flick website, your respective websites, social media, the album, where at what state it's in, and where they can find that. Anywhere else you want me to send people, or anything you want to let folks know before we?
Yeah, I think if you are interested in checking out Cormorant, obviously, like, go check out whatever singles are out right now. We do have the physical version available for purchase on our Bandcamp and on our website. And a digital version that you can download as well. But if you want to wait to hear it on streaming, it's going to be coming out kind of a single at a time for the next few months. Another thing to note that Grant and I have really started to do this past year is write out our arrangements. That's a new thing for us. And it's been really amazing to see that people are actually starting to, like, play them on recitals. That's been really, really cool. We had them played in multiple countries. And so we've got versions of what you would hear on Cormorant that are going to be coming out, like, for, example, like a duet for bass and violin that you could pick up. But we also have existing arrangements from previous records that are available on our website as well. I don't know. Did I miss anything else? Also, just check out our website for shows. We're playing a lot these days, and we'd love to see people out at the shows.
Yeah. Big thanks for listening. Thanks for having us on here. Check out our socials too. We post a lot of random stuff there. We're very funny sometimes, so you can go laugh at us and see what we're up to on there.